My name is Malik Thompson, and I'm about to tell you about the night a billionaire CEO laughed in my face for giving her financial advice. What she didn't know was that her mockery would cost her everything, and the man she humiliated would become the only person who could save her empire. I still remember the weight of that silver tray in my hands, the way the crystal glasses caught the candlelight at Le Bernardin that Tuesday evening. After 3 years of serving Manhattan's elite while rebuilding my life from the ground up, I thought I'd developed thick enough skin to handle anything. I was wrong. Excuse me. Waiter. Her voice cut through the ambient conversation like a knife through silk. I have a question for you. If you're feeling the story, subscribe to Principal Stories and tap like YouTube's algorithm. Might not show us to you again, and we share powerful stories like this every week. I turned to face her, Vivian Clark. Even if you don't follow business news, you'd recognize her from the magazine covers, the TED Talks, the carefully curated Instagram feed showcasing her empire built from nothing. At 42, she was the founder and CEO of Clark Capital, a venture capital firm worth approximately $3.7 billion. Her signature platinum blonde bob was perfect. Her Tom Ford suit probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and her smile held all the warmth of a corporate audit. Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? She exchanged glances with the 3 other executives at her table, a smirk playing at her lips. We're discussing where to allocate our Q4 investment portfolio. She paused for effect, her companions already beginning to chuckle. And I thought, why not get a fresh perspective? So tell me, what would you do with, say, $50 million in today's market? The table erupted in laughter. Not the good-natured kind that comes from genuine humor, but the ugly, self-satisfied laughter of people who think they're in on a joke at someone else's expense. I should have walked away. Should have just smiled politely, taken her actual order, and moved on with my shift. But something about the calculated cruelty in her eyes, the way she was performing for her colleagues, using me as a prop in her little power play, it hit a nerve I thought I buried. Honestly, I met her gaze directly. I divest 20% of your current position in Meridian Tech immediately. Their reported cloud infrastructure growth is masking a critical security vulnerability that's going to go public within the next fiscal quarter. I'd reallocate $15 million to sustainable energy infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically focusing on distributed solar grids with government-backed purchase agreements. Another $15 million into mid-sized healthcare AI companies that specialize in diagnostic imaging, not the overvalued consumer health apps everyone's chasing. $10 million in stable municipal bonds to offset risk, and keep $10 million liquid for when Meridian stock drops 30%. Because that's when you buy back in at the corrected valuation. The laughter died. Vivian's smile froze on her face. One of her companions, a silver-haired man I recognized as her chief of staff, Daniel Holt, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. The third person at the table, a younger woman clutching a tablet, had stopped typing mid-sentence. That's oddly specific, Vivian said slowly, her tone shifting from amusement to something sharper. Did you memorize that from some podcast? No, ma'am. You asked for my opinion. That's my analysis based on current market indicators, geopolitical stability, assessments, and pattern recognition in tech sector vulnerabilities. I kept my voice level, professional. Now, about your dinner order. Daniel Holt set down his wine glass with a deliberate clink. What's your name? Malik. Malik what? Thompson? And where exactly did a waiter at Le Bernardin acquire expertise in venture capital allocation? His tone suggested he already knew the answer and didn't like it. Before I could respond, Vivian raised a perfectly manicured hand. Daniel, please. She turned back to me, her eyes calculating now, the mockery replaced by something more dangerous, curiosity. Meridian Tech. Why would you target them specifically? This was the moment. I should have backed down, made an excuse, claimed I'd read it somewhere. Instead, I said, their senior VP of infrastructure announced his resignation 3 weeks ago. It was buried in a Friday afternoon press release designed to minimize attention. When executives at that level leave right before earnings reports, it's usually because they know something's coming that they don't want attached to their name. Cross-reference that. With the uptick in their security patch releases, 53% more than industry average in the past quarter, and the pattern suggests they're plugging holes in a sinking ship. The market hasn't caught on yet because everyone's distracted by their impressive revenue numbers. But revenue doesn't matter when a data breach exposes your entire client base. The silence at the table was deafening. Well, Vivian said finally, her smile returning but different now, calculated. You're either the most well-informed waiter in Manhattan or, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Or he's lying, Daniel finished for her, trying to sound impressive with jargon he doesn't understand. I understand it perfectly, sir. I used to work in this world. The words came out before I could stop them, before circumstances changed. What circumstances? Vivian leaned forward, genuinely interested now. The kind that teach you who people really are when you lose everything. I met her gaze steadily. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other tables. Would you like to order, or should I give you more time? Something flickered across Vivian's face, gone too quickly for me to identify. Give us a moment, she said quietly. I walked away, feeling their eyes on my back, hearing the immediate burst of urgent whispered conversation. My hands were shaking as I approached the service station. 3 years. 3 years of keeping my head down, staying invisible, rebuilding from nothing. And I'd just blown my cover because of wounded pride. Malik, Pierre, the floor manager, appeared at my elbow. What did you say to the Clark party? Just answered the question, sir. She's asking about you specifically, your background. His expression was unreadable. Should I be concerned? No, sir. It won't happen again. But even as I said it, I knew something had shifted. You can't unring a bell, and I had just announced to one of the most powerful women in Manhattan finance that I was more than the uniform I wore. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Vivian's table ordered, ate, and departed without further conversation. But when I cleared their settings, I found something tucked under her. Dessert plate, a business card with a handwritten note on the back. Meridian Tech. If you're right, call me. If you're wrong, lose this number. Either way, you've got my attention. VC. Beneath her note was a phone number and an amount that made my breath catch. Consultation fee, $10,000. Paid regardless of outcome. $10,000. 2 months rent. 3 semesters of the online finance courses I was taking to rebuild my credentials. The difference between surviving and actually living. I flipped the card over. Embossed in elegant script. Vivian Clark, founder and CEO, Clark Capital. My sister Maya's voice echoed in my head from our last phone call. Malik, you can't hide forever. At some point, you have to decide if you're going to let what happened define you, or if you're going to take back your life. I pocketed the card. That night, in my studio apartment in Harlem, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I opened my laptop and accessed the encrypted files I kept from my old life, my real life, before everything fell apart. My name is Malik Thompson. I'm 31 years old. And until 3 years ago, I was a senior analyst at Whitmore and Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious boutique investment firms. I had a 6-figure salary, an apartment in Chelsea, and a reputation for pattern recognition. That had made the firm millions in correctly predicted market movements. Then came the Wycliffe Group scandal. I had discovered irregularities in a series of transactions involving our firm's largest client, the Wycliffe Group, a consortium of investors with connections that ran deep into old money and political power. The pattern was clear: insider trading, market manipulation, securities fraud. Textbook illegal activity hidden behind layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. I did what I thought was right. I reported it to my managing director, a man I'd trusted and admired, a man I'd believed would do the right thing. Instead, within 48 hours, I was the one under investigation. Somehow, evidence appeared that suggested I was the one conducting the illegal trades. My credentials had been used to authorize transactions I'd never made. Digital footprints led back to my computer. Bank records showed payments to offshore accounts I'd never opened. It was a perfect frame job, and I had no way to prove my innocence. The firm that had once valued my insights threw me to the wolves to protect their real clients. Within a week, I was fired, blacklisted, and facing potential federal charges. I ran, changed my name legally, used what little money I had left to disappear into the service industry where nobody asks too many questions about your past. Malik Thompson, the waiter, was born from the ashes of Malik Jamal Thompson, the financial analyst whose career had been destroyed to protect powerful people's secrets. For 3 years, I'd been invisible, safe, alive, if not exactly living. Now, staring at Vivian Clark's business card, I had a choice to make. I spent that night doing what I did best: research. Vivian Clark wasn't just successful, she was a phenomenon. Built her firm from a $500,000 inheritance into a multi-billion-dollar empire in less than 15 years. Known for aggressive acquisition strategies and an almost supernatural ability to identify undervalued opportunities. She was also known for something else. She didn't suffer fools. Didn't tolerate weakness, and didn't look back once she'd made a decision. The business profiles painted her as brilliant but ruthless, innovative but calculating. More than one article mentioned her tendency to test people, to push them to see how they responded under pressure. The dinner conversation had been a test, and somehow I'd passed. But there was something else in my research that made me pause. 6 months ago, Clark Capital had made a significant investment in a tech infrastructure company. The announcement had generated positive press, confident projections, predictions of substantial returns. That company's name was Meridian Tech. My analysis hadn't been theoretical. Vivian Clark had already bet heavily on the very company I'd identified as vulnerable. If I was right, she stood to lose hundreds of millions. If I was wrong, she'd write me off as another charlatan trying to sound impressive. I checked the markets. Meridian Tech's stock was stable, even climbing slightly. Nothing in the public sphere suggested the problems I'd identified, but I knew I was right. Pattern recognition was my gift, the one thing they couldn't take from me when they destroyed my career. At 2:37 a.m., I made my decision. I called the number. It rang 3 times before a crisp, professional voice answered. Not Vivian herself, but clearly someone in her orbit. "This is the Clark Capital executive line. My name is Malik Thompson. Miss Clark gave me this number tonight at Le Bernardine. She said to call if I was right about Meridian Tech." A pause. "Hold, please." The hold lasted less than 30 seconds before Vivian's own voice came on the line. She didn't sound like someone who'd been sleeping. "Mr. Thompson, I wasn't certain you'd actually call." "Neither was I, ma'am. Call me Vivian." "Ma'am makes me feel ancient." There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "So, tell me why I should believe your analysis over the dozens of experts I pay 7 figures annually to give me advice. Because I don't want anything from you except a chance to prove I'm right. Your experts told you what you wanted to hear. I told you what you needed to know. There's a difference. Philosophical. I appreciate that. I could hear what sounded like keyboard tapping. I looked into you after you left. Or rather, I had my people look into you. Malik Thompson, the waiter, exists. Malik Thompson, the financial genius, does not. Which raises interesting questions. My mouth went dry. What kind of questions? The kind that make me wonder what someone with your obvious expertise is doing serving overpriced seafood to people who don't appreciate it. The typing stopped. I'm a businesswoman, Malik. I believe in transparency and professional relationships. So let me be clear. I don't care about your past. I don't care why you're slinging drinks instead of running a fund. I care about one thing, whether you can make me money or save me from losing it. I can do both. Prove it. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office. Bring whatever analysis led you to your conclusion about Meridian. And Malik, her voice hardened slightly. Don't waste my time. I have very little patience for people who talk a good game but can't deliver. I'll be there. Good. And Malik, wear a suit, not a uniform. Let's see if you remember how the line went dead. I sat in the dark of my apartment, staring at my phone, realizing I'd just done something irreversible. I was walking back into the world that had chewed me up and spit me out, into the direct line of sight of people who might recognize me, might connect Malik Thompson, the waiter to Malik Jamal Thompson, the disgraced analyst who disappeared 3 years ago. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than the constant low-grade fear and resignation that had become my baseline. I felt alive. The next morning, I stood in front of my closet, looking at the single suit I'd kept from my old life. Navy blue, Tom Ford, purchased during better days when I'd been climbing the ladder instead of serving people on it. I'd kept it for job interviews that never came, for opportunities that didn't materialize. Now, finally, I had a reason to wear it. It still fit, though I'd lost weight over the years. The face looking back at me from the mirror was different too. Harder, more cautious. The easy confidence of my younger self had been stripped away by betrayal and survival. But underneath, I could still see traces of the man I've been, the man I might become again. Clark Capital's offices occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. The lobby was all marble and modern art, the kind of aggressive wealth display that announced we're important and you're not before you even reach the elevator. The receptionist looked up as I approached, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to subtle suspicion. A black man in a suit in a building like this could be a lot of things: executive, lawyer, consultant. But the micro-assessment that crossed her face suggested she was weighing which category I belonged to and whether she should be concerned. Malik Thompson, I said calmly, I have a 9 a.m. appointment with Ms. Clark. She checked her computer, and her eyebrows rose fractionally. You're in her private calendar. The emphasis on private carried layers of meaning. Top floor. They're expecting you. The elevator ride gave me 60 seconds to review my analysis one more time. I'd spent the night rebuilding my research from scratch, documenting every data point, every pattern, every connection that had led me to my conclusion about Meridian Tech. If Vivian wanted proof, I'd give her proof that would be irrefutable. The executive floor was quieter than I'd expected. Thick carpeting absorbed sound. Frosted glass walls offered privacy while maintaining the illusion of transparency. A young man in an expensive suit met me as the elevator doors opened. Mr. Thompson, I'm Kevin, Ms. Clark's executive assistant. She's in the conference room with her senior team. They're waiting for you. Senior team? That wasn't what I'd expected. I thought this was a private meeting. Kevin's expression remained professionally neutral. Ms. Clark believes in efficiency. If your analysis has merit, her team needs to hear it firsthand. If it doesn't, he trailed off with a slight shrug that said everything about what would happen to someone who wasted Vivian Clark's time. He led me to a glass-walled conference room where 5 people were seated around an oval table. Vivian sat at the head, Daniel Holt to her right. The others I didn't recognize, but their body language screamed senior executives, people accustomed to power and not particularly pleased to have their morning disrupted. Malik, Vivian stood, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. Thank you for coming. Let me introduce you to my core team. You've met Daniel, my chief of staff. This is Jennifer Lau, head of tech investments. Marcus Freeman, chief risk officer. And Sarah Cohen, our lead analyst for infrastructure sectors. Each of them looked at me with varying degrees of skepticism. Sarah Cohen, in particular, studied me with undisguised hostility. This was her territory. I was invading. Please, Vivian gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table from her. I've told my team about your rather bold claim regarding Meridian Tech. As you might imagine, it's generated some discussion, particularly since we have substantial capital allocated to that position. How substantial? I asked. 240 million, Jennifer Lau said flatly, which is why your little theory better have something behind it other than lucky guessing. I opened my laptop, connected to the room's display system, and began my presentation. I'd structured it the way I used to at Whitmore, starting with the macro-level indicators and drilling down into the specifics that had triggered my pattern recognition. Meridian Tech's growth story is compelling on the surface, I began, my own face appearing on the screen behind me. 37% revenue increase year over year, expanding client base, strong earnings reports. But those are the numbers they want you to see. Let me show you what they're hiding. I walked them through the resignation of the senior VP of infrastructure, the timing, and the language of the press release. Then the unusual uptick in security patches. Then the less obvious indicators, changes in their insurance policies, specifically increased premiums for cyber liability coverage, alterations in their standard client contracts regarding data breach notifications, a quiet shift in their reserve allocations that suggested they were building a war chest for potential legal expenses. Individually, each of these could be explained away, I said, but together they form a pattern. Meridian Tech knows they have a serious vulnerability. They're preparing for it to become public, and when it does, their stock is going to crater. Sarah Cohen leaned forward. This is entirely speculative. You're cherry-picking data points and building a narrative around them. Then explain the executive stock sales, I replied calmly, pulling up another chart. In the past 90 days, 5 senior executives have sold significant portions of their holdings. Not enough to trigger SEC concerns, but substantial enough to protect their personal wealth, including the CEO, who sold $47 million in stock 6 weeks ago. That got their attention. Insider stock sales were public information, but the pattern of multiple executives quietly divesting at the same time while maintaining a positive public narrative, that was damning. Marcus Freeman, the risk officer, spoke for the first time. Have you shared this analysis with anyone else? No. Why not? Vivian asked. This kind of insight could make you very valuable to any number of firms. I met her eyes. Because 3 years ago, I tried to do the right thing and share what I knew about illegal activity in my firm. It destroyed my career and my life. I don't trust easily anymore, Miss Clark. And I needed to know whether you were someone who actually wanted the truth or just wanted to be told you were right. The room fell silent. Daniel Holt studied me with new intensity, clearly trying to place me in some mental database of industry scandals. Which firm? He asked quietly. One that doesn't exist anymore, I said, which was technically true. Whitmore and Associates had dissolved 18 months after my departure, consumed by the same corruption I tried to expose. Vivian stood abruptly, everyone out, except Malik. Her team exchanged glances but complied, filing out of the conference room in professional silence. Sarah Cohen was the last to leave, pausing at the door to give me a look that clearly said, "I'm watching you." When the door closed, Vivian moved to the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. "You were right to be cautious about sharing your analysis. In this world, information is currency. And you just handed me something worth considerably more than the $10,000 I offered." "I don't want money," I said. "Not primarily." She turned to face me. "Then what do you want, Malik Thompson, who isn't really Malik Thompson?" "I want a chance to do what I'm good at again. I want to use my mind for something other than memorizing wine lists and pretending to be less than I am. And yes, I want enough financial security that I don't have to worry about being destroyed again if someone decides I'm inconvenient." "Fair demands." Vivian returned to her chair. "Here's what I'm willing to offer. Consulting position, initially contract-based. You work exclusively for Clark Capital. We verify your analysis on Meridian Tech. If you're right, the consulting contract becomes permanent with a base salary of $500,000 annually plus performance bonuses. If you're wrong, you get your $10,000, and we part ways." $500,000. It was more money than I'd made even in my best year at Whitmore. It was also a trap, tying me to Vivian Clark and her firm, bringing me back into a world where people might recognize me, might start asking questions about my past. "And if I'm right," I said carefully, "what happens with Meridian Tech? You'll divest if your analysis holds." "Yes." Immediately and completely, she leaned forward, which brings me to my next question. "What else have you been seeing? What other patterns have you identified that someone with your skills might notice?" This was the real test. She wasn't just hiring me for one insight. She wanted to know if I was a one-hit wonder or if I could consistently deliver. "3 companies in your current portfolio are overvalued based on fundamental analysis masked by market enthusiasm," I said. "2 have management teams that are statistically more likely to engage in aggressive accounting practices. And 1, Vivian, is running a Ponzi scheme so sophisticated that they've gotten away with it for almost 4 years." Her expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten almost imperceptibly on the armrests of her chair. "Name them?" Over the next 2 hours, I walked Vivian Clark through every pattern I'd identified in her portfolio. Some were minor concerns, easy corrections. Others were potential catastrophes waiting to happen. By the time I finished, her entire quarterly investment strategy would need to be reassessed. Most executives would have been defensive, angry at having their judgment questioned. Vivian just listened, asked pointed questions, and took notes in a leather-bound journal. "You've just potentially saved me from losses exceeding $500 million, she said finally, "which means either you're the most insightful analyst I've ever encountered, or you're running an extremely sophisticated con. How would you determine which?" "Time and verification." She closed her journal. "I'm going to accept your contract terms with one modification. You start immediately, full-time, and your first assignment is to work with my team to verify every single claim you've made. If even one proves to be false or manipulated, the contract is void. If they all hold, your salary increases to $750,000. That's a significant modification. I'm a significant risk taker when the potential return justifies it." She stood, extending her hand again. "Do we have a deal?" I thought about my studio apartment, my waiter's uniform, the 3 years I'd spent hiding from my own potential. I thought about the look in Vivian Clark's eyes when she'd mocked me. Dinner, and the different look she wore now, one of respect hard-earned. "One condition," I said. "My past remains private. Whatever you think you might learn about who I was before, it stays between us. I won't have my work questioned because of my history." Something flickered in Vivian's expression. Not agreement, exactly, but understanding. Everyone has a past they're running from, Malik. In this business, we collect them. Your secrets are safe as long as you're valuable. The moment you're not. She didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't a promise. It was a threat wrapped in silk. Then I'll make sure I stay valuable, I said, and shook her hand. That's how I walked back into the world of high finance through the door of a woman who'd laughed at me for giving her advice. What neither of us knew then was that my past and her future were about to collide in ways that would test everything we thought we knew about loyalty, power, and the cost of redemption. Because while I'd been busy spotting patterns in her portfolio, I'd missed the biggest pattern of all, Clark Capital's recent aggressive expansion into Asian markets was being financed through a consortium of investors that included the Wycliffe Group. The same people who'd framed me. The same people who'd destroy anyone who got too close to their secrets. And I'd just accepted a job that would put me in direct line of their attention once again. The first 2 weeks at Clark Capital were a blur of 18-hour days, proving that my analysis wasn't luck or fiction. Vivian had assigned me a small office, access to her firm's research, databases, and a single assistant, a sharp 24-year-old named Amanda, who treated me with the cautious respect reserved for someone whose standing in the hierarchy was unclear but potentially dangerous. Coffee? Amanda asked on my 5th day, appearing at my door with the kind of timing that suggested she'd been watching for me to look up from my screens. Please. Black? She set the cup down, hesitating. Can I ask you something? Depends on what it is. Everyone's talking about you, the mysterious consultant who has Vivian's ear. Daniel Holt is furious, says you came out of nowhere and upended months of strategy. But Vivian shot down every objection he raised. She leaned against the doorframe. Who are you really? I'm exactly who I appear to be. Someone who sees patterns others miss. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I hope you stick around. This place could use someone who shakes things up. After she left, I stared at my screens, thinking about her question. Who was I really? For 3 years, I'd been Malik Thompson the survivor, the invisible man. Before that, I'd been Malik Jamal Thompson, the rising star analyst. But neither of those identities felt complete anymore. I was becoming something else, someone forged from the broken pieces of both those lives. The intercom on my desk buzzed. Malik, Vivian's voice. Conference room? Now. I found her standing at the head of the table, her expression grim. Sarah Cohen sat to her right, looking pale. Marcus Freeman was reviewing something on his tablet, shaking his head slowly. Daniel Holt wasn't present, which immediately raised warning flags. Meridian Tech, Vivian said, without preamble. Tell me you saw this coming. She clicked the remote, and the wall screen filled with breaking news. Meridian Tech announces massive data breach. 300 million client records compromised. The timestamp showed the announcement had gone live 20 minutes ago. I checked my phone. The market hadn't even opened yet, but Meridian's pre-market trading had already dropped 33%. You were right, Sarah Cohen said quietly. 3 weeks. You called it to the week. She looked at me with something between respect and resentment. How? Pattern recognition isn't magic, I said. It's just paying attention to the things people try to hide. The bigger the secret, the more energy they spend on misdirection. And that energy creates its own pattern. Vivian was already on her phone. Jennifer, execute the divestment protocol we discussed. Yes, all of it. I want us completely out of Meridian by market. Close. I don't care what the loss is on the remaining shares. Get us out. She ended the call. Thanks to your analysis, we liquidated 90% of our Meridian position last week at peak value. This will still cost us approximately $18 million on our remaining shares, but you just saved us from a $250 million loss. Congratulations, Marcus Freeman said, though he didn't sound particularly happy about it. You just became the most expensive consultant in the building. Where's Daniel? I asked. Good question. Vivian replied, her jaw tight. He should have been here 20 minutes ago. Amanda, get him on the phone. But Daniel Holt didn't answer his phone, or his text messages, or the increasingly urgent emails from Vivian's assistant. By noon, when the markets opened and Meridian Tech's stock had plummeted 42%, Daniel Holt had vanished. "This is a problem," Marcus Freeman said, pacing Vivian's office where we'd reconvene. "Daniel has access to everything. Client lists, investment strategies, confidential communications. If he's been compromised. Or if he was always compromised," I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. "Explain," Vivian said, her voice dangerously soft. I pulled up my laptop. "I've been running background patterns on everyone in your senior team. Standard risk assessment. Daniel's financial record shows some interesting anomalies. 3 deposits in the past 6 months, each for exactly $50,000 from shell corporations based in the Cayman Islands. You investigated my chief of staff?" Vivian's tone was icy. "I investigated everyone in your inner circle," I replied. "You're paying me to identify risks. People are the biggest risk in any organization. Those deposits could be legitimate," Sarah protested. "Consulting fees, investments, any number of things. They could be, except they correlate directly with 3 key strategic decisions where Daniel advocated positions. That, in retrospect, would have cost Clark Capital significant money if you'd followed his advice, including his strong recommendation to double down on Meridian Tech last month." Vivian's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands close into fists. "You're suggesting Daniel has been working against Clark Capital's interests?" "I'm suggesting Daniel has been getting paid to steer your decisions in specific directions. By whom and for what ultimate purpose, I can't tell you yet. But the pattern is there. Marcus was already typing on his tablet. I'm locking down his access to our systems. Vivian, we need to call security, possibly even the SEC." "No." Vivian's voice cut through the room. "Not yet. If Daniel has been compromised, whoever's behind it will know the moment we make this public. I want to know who's pulling his strings before they can cover their tracks." She turned to me. "Can you find out?" "Possibly. If you give me access to Daniel's files, his communications, his calendar, everything, you will have it within the hour." Vivian looked at Sarah and Marcus. "Not a word to anyone about this. As far as the rest of the company knows, Daniel is out sick. Malik, I want a full report on my desk by tomorrow morning. I don't care what you have to do or how many hours it takes. Over the next 16 hours, I barely left my office. Amanda brought food I didn't eat and coffee I drank cold. I dove into Daniel Holt's digital life, like an archaeologist excavating a crime scene, peeling back layers of carefully constructed normalcy to find the rot underneath. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. Daniel hadn't been working alone. He'd been part of a coordinated effort to manipulate Clark Capital's investment decisions, steering the firm away from profitable opportunities and toward positions that would benefit a specific group of investors. Every misleading recommendation, every ignored warning sign, every delayed decision could be traced back to Daniel's influence. And behind it all, funding the shell corporations, coordinating the timing, pulling the strings, the Wycliffe Group. My blood ran cold when I saw that name in the financial documents. They'd found me. Somehow, despite my precautions, despite my new identity, they'd tracked me to Clark Capital. Daniel Holt had been their inside man, monitoring the firm, ready to act if I became a threat. But there was more. The documents revealed something I hadn't expected. The Wycliffe Group wasn't just targeting Clark Capital to neutralize me. They were orchestrating a much larger play, a coordinated attack on multiple firms, driving them toward bad investments while positioning themselves to profit from the chaos. Clark Capital wasn't a victim. It was a weapon. And Vivian Clark, brilliant, and ruthless and convinced of her own invincibility. Had been dancing on strings she didn't even know existed. I could have walked away. Should have walked away. Exposing this would mean exposing myself, bringing my past into the light, facing the people who destroyed me once before. Instead, I finished my report, documented every connection, traced every dollar, built a case that was irrefutable. Then, at 6:47 a.m., I sent it to Vivian's private email with a subject line that said simply, "The truth." She called me 63 seconds later. My office. Now, I found her standing at her window again, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan gold. The report was open on her tablet, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at me. "Malik Jamal Thompson," she said quietly, "senior analyst at Whitmore and Associates, falsely accused of insider trading. Career destroyed by the Wycliffe Group when you discovered their illegal activity." She turned to face me. "That's who you really are." There was no point in denying it. "Yes. And you came to work for me knowing that the Wycliffe Group had infiltrated my organization. I didn't know that until last night. But yes, I knew they were part of your investor consortium. I thought I could stay under the radar, do my job, keep my head down. I was wrong." Vivian moved to her desk, sat down, and studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Daniel Holt has been my chief of staff for 7 years. I trusted him completely. And you're telling me he's been working against me this entire time?" "I'm telling you he's been working for people who see Clark Capital as an asset to be controlled. They didn't just want to hurt you, Vivian. They wanted to own you without you even knowing it. And you," her eyes sharpened, "they wanted to destroy you 3 years ago. They'll want to destroy you again now that you've exposed them. Probably. Yet you sent me that report anyway, knowing it would mean revealing yourself." I met her gaze steadily. "You asked me what I wanted when you hired me. I said I wanted to do what I'm good at again. But there's more to it than that. I want to matter. I want my work to mean something more than just making rich people richer. The Wycliffe Group destroyed my life because I tried to expose corruption. If I walk away now, if I let them operate without consequence, then they win. And I'm tired of letting people like them win." Vivian was silent for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, sharp and dangerous and genuine. "Malik Thompson, you just made the biggest mistake of your professional life." My heart sank. "You're going to turn me over to them." "I'm going to go to war with them," she corrected. "And you're going to help me." Over the next 3 weeks, Vivian Clark transformed from the arrogant CEO who'd mocked me at dinner into something far more formidable, a woman with a vendetta and the resources to pursue it. She locked down her company's security, brought in external forensic accountants, and quietly began building a case against the Wycliffe Group that would make my original investigation look like amateur work. She also did something I didn't expect. She made me partner, not a junior partner, not an analyst with a fancy title, an actual equity partner in Clark Capital, with a stake in the company and a voice in its strategic direction. The paperwork was executed with clinical efficiency, her lawyers working overtime to structure the arrangement in a way that protected both of us while giving me legitimate standing in the firm. "Why?" I asked her the day the documents were finalized. "You could have just paid me consulting fees. This makes me a permanent part of your organization." "Because consultants leave," Vivian replied. "Partners stay. And because if we're going to take on the Wycliffe Group, I need someone at my side who understands them, who knows how they think, who won't fold when they start applying pressure. That's you? You barely know me. I know you're the only person in 3 years who's told me an uncomfortable truth when everyone else was telling me what I wanted to hear. I know you sacrificed your anonymity to give me information that could have stayed buried. And I know you're carrying around guilt from your past that makes you want to prove something." She leaned forward. "I can use all of those things, Malik. And in return, I can give you what you actually want, vindication." She was right. Of course, Vivian Clark hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by being wrong about people. She'd identified my motivations with the same precision I used to identify market patterns. There's something else, I said. Something I haven't told you. Her expression didn't change. About? About why the Wycliffe Group framed me. I pulled up a file on my laptop, one I kept encrypted for 3 years. I told you I discovered illegal trading. That was true. But what I didn't tell you was what they were trading. It wasn't just stocks or bonds or regular securities. What was it? They were manipulating government contracts, defense spending, infrastructure projects. They had people inside the SEC, inside congressional committees, inside procurement offices. They weren't just insider trading, Vivian. They were running a systematic corruption network that touched everything from weapons contracts to disaster relief funding. The silence in her office was absolute. And you have proof of this, she said finally. I have fragments, pieces, enough to know it was real, not enough to prove it in court. That's why they came after me so hard. If I'd just discovered securities fraud, they might have paid me off or threatened me. But what I found was big enough that they couldn't take the risk. They had to completely destroy my credibility so that anything I said would be dismissed as the rantings of a disgraced analyst. Vivian stood and moved to her window again. A habit I'd learned meant she was thinking deeply. How many people know about this, about what you really discovered? Just me. And now the files you kept. Where are they? Encrypted, distributed across multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me, they're programmed to automatically upload to major news organizations. She turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something like fear in Vivian Clark's eyes. Not fear for herself, but recognition of the scale of what we were facing. We need help, she said quietly. This is bigger than Clark Capital, bigger than your vindication or my vendetta. Who would help us? Everyone in finance is either connected to the Wycliffe Group or scared of them. The regulatory agencies are compromised. Law enforcement won't move without concrete evidence. And we can't get that evidence without access we don't have. Vivian smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression I'd seen on her face yet. I didn't say we need official help. I said we need help, and I know exactly where to find it. She made a phone call, brief and cryptic, then turned back to me. We're meeting someone tomorrow night. Someone who has as much reason to hate the Wycliffe Group as you do, and considerably more resources to do something about it. Who? You'll see. Until then, go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start playing offense. I left her office feeling like I just jumped off a cliff without knowing if there was water below or rocks. Vivian Clark had a plan, clearly, but her plans were as ruthless as they were brilliant. Trusting her completely would be foolish, but I'd run out of better options 3 years ago. The meeting was in a private room at an exclusive club in Tribeca, the kind of place where membership costs more than most people earn in a year, and discretion is enforced with the kind of legal agreements that make NDAs look friendly. Vivian and I arrived separately, approached from different directions, professional paranoia in full effect. The man waiting for us was in his 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of quiet authority that suggested he'd been powerful for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. His eyes, sharp and calculating, assessed me in the 3 seconds it took to cross the room to his table. Vivian, he stood, kissed her cheek with the familiarity of old friends. It's been too long. Robert, she turned to me. Malik Thompson, meet Robert Harrison, former SEC commissioner, current independent investor, and someone who knows more about the Wycliffe Group than anyone outside their inner circle. Harrison extended his hand. His grip was firm, testing. Vivian tells me you have information about our mutual friends. Information that could finally give us what we need to bring them down. Potentially, I said carefully. But before I share anything, I need to know why you want them brought down and what you're prepared to do with the information. Harrison smiled, a predatory expression. Fair question. Short answer, they destroyed my career 8 years ago when I got too close to their operations during an investigation. Convince certain powerful people that I was biased, politically motivated, a threat to free markets. By the time they were done with me, I was forced to resign to avoid dragging my family through a public scandal. He sat back down, gesturing for us to join him. Long answer, I've spent the last 8 years building a case against them. Slowly, carefully, collecting evidence piece by piece. I have documents, testimonies, financial records. What I don't have is the smoking gun, the one piece of evidence that connects everything and makes the pattern undeniable. And you think I have that, I said. I think you might. Vivian tells me you discovered their government contract manipulation. If you can prove that connection, if you can show the flow of money from Wycliffe through to government officials, then everything else I have suddenly becomes part of a larger conspiracy that even they can't talk their way out of. I looked at Vivian. She nodded slightly. Permission or encouragement or maybe just acknowledgement that we'd reached the point of no return. I don't have complete proof, I admit it, but I have enough to know where to look. Account numbers, shell corporations, dates that correlate with specific contract awards. If we can access the right databases, cross-reference the right transactions, the pattern will emerge. Databases that are protected, classified, or both, Harrison said. Yes, I'm aware of the challenge, which is why I've spent years cultivating relationships with people who have access to those systems. People who have their own reasons for wanting to see the Wycliffe Group exposed. He leaned forward. Here's what I'm proposing. You give me everything you have. I combine it with my evidence and use my contacts to fill in the gaps. When we have an airtight case, we take it to the Justice Department, the FBI, and the press simultaneously. Maximum impact, minimum opportunity for suppression. And in the meantime, Vivian asked, the Wycliffe Group knows something is happening. They've lost their inside position at Clark Capital, which means they know we're aware of their operation. They'll be taking steps to protect themselves, possibly taking steps to neutralize us, which is why we move fast, Harrison said. We have a window, maybe weeks, before they can fully regroup. We use that time to gather everything we need, coordinate with law enforcement, and prepare for the public reveal. He looked at me. The question is whether you're prepared to go public, Malik, because there's no way to expose them without exposing yourself. Your name, your story, everything you've been hiding. It all comes out. I'd known this moment would come eventually, had dreaded it for 3 years. The prospect of standing in the light again, of being seen, judged, potentially, doubted or dismissed, was terrifying in ways that physical danger wasn't. But I thought about Daniel Holt, about the people like him who'd sold their integrity for money and power. I thought about the analysts at Whitmore who'd looked the other way when I was framed. I thought about everyone who'd chosen comfort over courage, who'd let the Wycliffe Group operate without consequence because fighting them was too hard, too risky, too costly. I'm in, I said. Whatever it takes. Harrison smiled and pulled out a secure tablet. Then let's get to work. Over the next 4 weeks, I learned more about the Wycliffe Group's operation than I'd ever known when I first stumbled onto their fraud. Robert Harrison had spent 8 years building a comprehensive picture of their network, the shell corporations, the bribes disguised as consulting, fees, the government officials on their payroll, the journalists who killed, stories for them, the regulatory investigators who looked the other way. What I discovered 3 years ago was just the tip of a massive corruption iceberg. The government contract manipulation was their specialty, but they diversified into every form of financial crime imaginable. Market manipulation, insider trading, securities fraud, money laundering, the list went on. And through it all, they'd maintained a facade of legitimacy, hiding behind prestigious law firms and respected financial institutions. Clark Capital had been one of dozens of firms they'd infiltrated. Vivian's situation with Daniel Holt wasn't unique. It was their standard operating procedure. Plant someone in senior management, gradually influence decisions, extract value while appearing to be a legitimate business partner. It was brilliant, systematic, and almost impossible to prove without the kind of evidence we were assembling. "We have enough," Harrison announced on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. We'd convened in Vivian's office, the three of us surrounded by documents, financial records, and testimony transcripts. I verified the transaction patterns Malik identified. They match perfectly with contract awards in 3 federal agencies, combined with the testimony from 2 former Wycliffe employees who've agreed to cooperate. We can demonstrate a clear pattern of corruption. "When do we go public?" Vivian asked. "Tomorrow. I've coordinated with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI. They're moving simultaneously on multiple targets: arrests, subpoenas, asset freezers, the full package. The press embargo lifts at 6 a.m. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. After years of running, of hiding, of building toward this moment, it was actually happening. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. Tomorrow, I'd be vindicated or destroyed all over again. "There's one more thing," Harrison said, looking at me seriously. "The U.S. Attorney wants you to testify before the grand jury. Your testimony will be crucial in establishing the timeline and the nature of your original discovery. Are you prepared to do that?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. Harrison nodded approvingly. "Good. You'll need a lawyer. I can recommend several who specialize in whistleblower protection." "Already covered," Vivian interjected. "Clark Capital has retained the best white-collar criminal defense firm in the city. They'll represent Malik for as long as necessary, at no cost to him." I stared at her. "That's what partners do for each other," she finished. "Besides, you're about to make Clark Capital famous for being on the right side of the biggest financial scandal in decades. Protecting you is protecting our investment." It was so perfectly Vivian, a mixture of genuine support and cold business calculation, that I couldn't help but smile. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to be brutal. The Wycliffe Group won't go down quietly. They'll attack your credibility, dig into your past, make your life hell in every way they can. You'll be on every news channel, every financial blog, probably even the late-night comedy shows. Everything you've tried to keep private will become public. Are you ready for that?" I thought about my sister Maya, who'd stood by me even when she'd had her doubts. About the other analysts whose careers had been destroyed by the Wycliffe Group. About everyone who'd been victimized by corruption that thrived because good people stayed silent. "I'm ready," I said. The next morning, I watched from Vivian's office as the news broke. Federal agents executing search warrants at Wycliffe Group offices. Simultaneous arrests of 12 executives and government officials. Emergency trading halts for multiple securities. And at the center of it all, the story of a whistleblower who'd been destroyed 3 years ago, who'd disappeared and rebuilt his life, and who'd finally gathered the evidence to bring down the people who'd tried to silence him. My phone started ringing before 7 a.m. News organizations, former colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years. I ignored most of them, following the advice of the lawyers Vivian had retained. Let the evidence speak first. Let the arrests demonstrate the credibility of the accusations. Only then would I tell my story publicly. By noon, the financial markets were in chaos. Multiple firms were implicated in the Wycliffe network, their stock prices crashing as investors fled. The SEC announced an emergency investigation into dozens of trades and transactions. Congressional committees scheduled hearings. The scandal was already being compared to Enron and Bernie Madoff. "How are you holding up?" Vivian asked, finding me in my office as the sun set on the most surreal day of my life? I'm not sure yet. Ask me in a week when the shock wears off. She sat down across from my desk, studying me with that intense gaze I'd come to recognize. You did it, Malik. You got your vindication. We did it, I corrected. Without you and Harrison, I'd still be waiting tables and hoping no one recognized me. True. But you were the one who took the risk of revealing yourself. You made the choice to fight instead of hide. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you walked into my dinner that night. I needed someone to challenge me, to remind me that intelligence and insight don't require the right pedigree or connections. You needed someone to mock. I couldn't help the slight smile. Vivian had the grace to look somewhat chagrined. I was arrogant. Worse, I was cruel for sport. You had every right to walk away and let me make disastrous investments based on Daniel's manipulations. The fact that you didn't, that you chose to help me, despite how I treated you, says more about your character than anything in your background file. I didn't do it entirely for noble reasons, I admitted. I wanted back into this world. I wanted to use my skills again. You offered me that opportunity, and I've profited enormously from it, Vivian replied. Clark Capital's reputation has never been stronger. We're being positioned as the firm that helped expose corruption, that chose integrity over short-term gains. Our client inquiries have tripled in the past 12 hours. She leaned forward. But here's what I want to know, Malik. Now that you've gotten what you wanted, now that your name is cleared and your career restored, are you staying? Or was Clark Capital just a means to an end? It was a fair question. A month ago, even a week ago, I might not have known the answer. But somewhere in the process of building this case, of working alongside Vivian, of transforming, from a waitress to a partner in a major financial firm, I'd found something unexpected. I'd found a place where I belonged. I'm staying, I said. If you'll have me. Her smile was genuine, warm in a way I'd rarely seen from her. Oh, I'm definitely keeping you. Someone needs to tell me when I'm being an arrogant fool. That's going to be a full-time job, I teased. Then it's fortunate you're now a partner with equity. You can afford the time commitment. Over the next 6 months, the Wycliffe Group scandal consumed the financial world. Federal trials, congressional hearings, regulatory reforms, and endless media coverage. I testified 3 times, each appearance easier than the last. My story resonated, not because it was unique, but because it was universal. One person standing up against corruption, paying a terrible price, and ultimately being vindicated. Clark Capital thrived in the aftermath. Vivian's decision to act on my warnings and cooperate with federal investigators positioned us as the rare firm that prioritized ethics over profit. Our assets under management doubled. We recruited top talent from firms implicated in the scandal. And through it all, Vivian and I built something that transcended our initial transactional relationship. We built a partnership based on mutual respect, complementary skills, and shared purpose. She was still arrogant sometimes, still ruthless in her business dealings. But she'd learned to listen, to question her assumptions, to value perspectives that challenged her worldview. And I'd learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that seeking help wasn't surrender, that sometimes the people who hurt you initially can become the ones who help you heal if you're willing to give them the chance to be better. Maya came to visit in April, almost a year after that fateful dinner at La Bernardine. We sat in my new office, glass-walled and spectacular, overlooking Central Park. I'm proud of you, she said simply, not for the success or the money or the vindication, for choosing to fight instead of hide, for trusting people again after you had every reason not to. I had a good teacher, I replied. You never gave up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. That's what family does, she smiled. Though I have to say, I preferred you as a waiter. You were more available for brunch. I laughed. I'll make time. Even partners at billion-dollar firms need their sisters to keep them grounded. Through the window, I could see the Manhattan skyline, the same city that had broken me and rebuilt me, that had tested everything I believed about justice, integrity, and redemption. Somewhere out there, other people were facing their own versions of what I'd gone through, being silenced, being destroyed, being forced to choose between their principles and their survival. I couldn't save all of them, but I could use my platform, my resources, my story to create a model for how to fight back. Clark Capital had established a whistleblower fund, offering legal support and financial protection for people exposing corporate corruption. We become a destination for talent that valued ethics alongside ambition. It wasn't perfect. Nothing in the world of finance ever is, but it was better. And sometimes better is all you can hope for. As I prepared for an afternoon meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Next board meeting, I need you to challenge my Asia strategy. I think I'm being too conservative, but I want your honest assessment, not agreement. I smiled, typing back, prepare to be told you're wrong. Her response came immediately. That's why I pay you the big bucks, partner. Partner, not consultant, not employee, not the waiter who'd given her unexpected advice. Partner. It had been a long journey from that moment of humiliation to this moment of mutual respect. A journey through fraud and framing, through fear and hiding, through courage and vindication. But every step had been necessary. Every choice had led here, to a life where I could use my gifts without apology, where I could speak truth without fear, where the color of my skin and the uniform I'd worn didn't define my worth or limit my potential. Vivian Clark had laughed at me once for giving her financial advice. Now, she paid me handsomely to challenge her thinking, push her strategies, and ensure Clark Capital never made decisions based on ego or blind spots. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but the real victory wasn't the money or the status or even the vindication. The real victory was reclaiming my voice, my purpose, my right to take up space in a world that had tried to erase me. And that, more than anything else, was worth every risk, every struggle, every moment of doubt along the way. My name is Malik Thompson. I was a waiter who became a partner, a victim who became a whistleblower, a man who lost everything and rebuilt it into something better than he'd ever imagined. And I'm just getting started. Humility doesn't make you small, it makes you strong. Arrogance, that can cost you everything. I learned that lesson the hard way. So did Vivian Clark. But together, we're proving that wisdom hard-earned can transform not just individuals, but entire institutions. The financial world is still corrupt in many ways, still racist, still classist, still rigged in favor of those with power and connections. But it's a little less corrupt than it was, a little more willing to listen to voices from unexpected places, a little more afraid of people who pay attention and speak truth. That's not much, but it's a start. And sometimes a start is all you need to change everything.